Happy morning, friends. I'm super excited to be here with you this morning. A very warm welcome to the fantastic third day at Thai Global Summit 2020. My name is Lokesh Nathani, your host for the session. I am the founder of a startup called Mera Wellness. The topic for the session is pitfalls a funded startup should avoid. Getting funded is a dream come true for startups. It gives a feeling of being arrived to many entrepreneurs. One must feel great when funded, but that's just a beginning. The feeling of being arrived is a trap. Actually, it adds a lot of responsibility and accountability as someone trusted your vision and invested. In the words of Simon Sinek, most people ignore opportunities because they see only danger. Entrepreneurs ignore danger because they see only opportunities. However, you ignore the dangers, but you need to know what pitfalls to avoid. To share the words of wisdom, we have a very distinguished panel. It is an absolute honor and privilege to introduce our speaker and moderator, Mr. Gopal Srinivasan. Mr. Gopal Srinivasan is the founder, chairman, and managing director of TVS Capital Funds Limited. Over an entrepreneurial career spanning 30 years, he has incubated many companies operating in diverse sectors, including technology, financial services, and auto components. A passionate entrepreneur and an avid angel investor, he is actively involved in the promotion of entrepreneurship. He is the founding member of the Chennai Angels, Chennai's premier angel investor network. He is the member of the Alternative Investment Policy Advisory Committee of SEBI. Mr. Gopal is an MBA from the Graduate School of Business Administration, University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, USA. When not mentoring the investment team or sharing his passion for building businesses with client partners, Mr. Gopal may be found.
Them that we need to support and honor and encourage to take risks and build this country. So, with that backdrop, today we are here to talk about what it takes to succeed, what pitfalls to avoid. And why I say succeed and not avoid, it's very simple. If you look at the fact that about 1,000 startups are funded in India each year, and that is a lot of startups. And Sandeep, Sudhir, and I am sure we look back in time, we could never imagine a day where 1,000 startups a year are funded in this country. But as we know, maybe 80 to 90% of them may not get past Series A, which clearly means, as we all know and we know every single day, that we need to be sure that we are among that 10 or 20%. Those numbers may never change. But what can change is whether, as a startup founder, we can be in that decile, which actually makes for success, and what we should avoid, and ideally what we should do to make it happen. Very quickly, I have with today, just to introduce the people you know very well. Sandeep Singhal is a member, a co-founder of Nexus Venture Partners, over 100 investments, over $1.5 billion in capital managed so far. Nexus, in a very simple way, is part of what Indian PE guys look at and call as a golden five. These are the 4-5 venture capitalists who pretty much get the best deal flow in the country simply because they've helped founders build great companies and build a track record. So Sandeep, welcome to the panel. My other colleague on the panel is one of the top intellectuals in the venture capital industry, Sudhir Rao, himself a founder of a business in Hyderabad, and then moved to Chennai to pursue his passion for Carnatic music, and then to be in Bangalore with WRVI Ventures, where he is the managing director, managing partner for India. A very versatile and widely talented individual across many fields. So welcome again, Sudhir, to this discussion. And I think it's therefore befitting for us to frame this discussion, guys, as what it takes to succeed and avoid pitfalls rather than what are the pitfalls to avoid, though pitfalls have to be discussed as the object of this conversation for us to really get to the path of success. So with these few words, I thought we can start talking about, Sandeep, the most common pitfall or trap that we keep hearing about when we have any conversation, and that is essentially people raising too much money. Let's start with the other side of the excess. Too much money, too high a valuation, money when it's not required, complex legal documents with liquidation preference that sort of puts your nose underwater. You've seen it all. What are your thoughts on this area?
So I think, number one, I would like to thank the organizers for giving us this opportunity and for Gopal to sort of lead us in this discussion. Broadly, I would say, but I think the point around overcapitalization is very important because when a company is bootstrapped, when it's getting started, the founder is determining the pace of growth, is determining how the company is going to scale and so on, right? There are challenges, obviously, because you have less resources. But when you raise capital, you are now on a time clock, right? There is somebody that is coming into your company with expectations for growth of that business, and that person is no longer you, right? So there's another person that is having this dialogue with you. If you raise a lot of capital, the pressure on growth, the pressure on changing your plans and so on increases that much more, right? So to your point, you use the word high valuations and overcapitalization. I think the two go hand in hand in a market which is very hot, and thankfully, in some ways, the Indian startup ecosystem is hot right now. There is a lot of interest in this space. India is seen as a large market overall, and we are seeing people raising large rounds and at high valuations, but then struggling to actually achieve the goals that they gave to the VCs or to the investors at the time of fundraising. So I think that's the biggest issue. And in chasing that growth, they can potentially spend money much faster than they should be spending. We've seen this in our own portfolio at times. I don't want to go into specific companies, but we've seen this issue, right, where large rounds get raised before the company is ready. So I think that's I let's really add to this. But for me, that's the biggest issue.
Yeah.
In fact, the round is the news before the business plan itself hits the news. Sandeep, one quick question. Do all these large rounds and these multiple rounds and valuations, do they get us into a kind of quicksand of legal agreements that people don't understand and find out too late?
Yeah.
Any examples?
Gopal, that's a very important point. So one of the things that, apart from business plan expectations that investors also have return expectations. And entrepreneurs don't realize this. Entrepreneurs focus on one term, which is the valuation. But there are multiple other terms in a term sheet. So you mentioned liquidation preference as one issue, right? You will see situations where an investor will give a high valuation, but will ask for a 2x liquidation preference. So in effect, they get twice their money before anybody else will see any money, right?
Right.
Or there is this, participating preferred, that I will first take whatever money I invest and then participate equally with everybody else, right? So now all of these are in effect reducing the valuation for the entrepreneur without the entrepreneur realizing it. So you are absolutely right. It's not just about the business plan expectations, it's also looking at the legal terms that are there in any financing round to make sure that your legal terms won't put you into a situation which is lifelong, right? Because if today I ask for a 2x liquidation preference in my Series A, the guy who's coming into Series B is going to ask for 2x, if not more. And every round is a larger round. So today I put in $5 million. I now expect $10 million to come to me before it goes anywhere else. Next round, it's a $50 million round. If that guy expects a 2x or a 3x, $100 million needs to be created by the company, right? So it just keeps piling up. So I think it's very important for a founder to really think about what the cap table will look like, but also what the terms of that investment will look like going forward. So absolutely, you're absolutely right.
I think it's interesting, Sandeep. You paint a picture of a person sitting in a sauna with a time bomb strapped around the waist, with a lot of venture capitalists looking through the glass window, if I were to put it in a very caricature manner, and then wondering what those contracts actually mean. Sudhir, in this world where people have raised too much money at too high valuations, which is an interesting world if it is true. In some cases, it is. What are your thoughts on what they do with the money? How do you see that playing out? How can they be sensible about creating value rather than watching about how people are trying to extract value from them through these various complex agreements?
Yeah, I think the very important point. First of all, of course, thanks to TiE Global for this summit and inviting me. this notion of overcapitalization and high valuations is very relative, Gopal. It's not something that is a static idea. At a point in time, there's a valuation given to an enterprise for the potential of its future. It's not necessarily only relating to the past. When we look at companies and we're looking at investing in them, they're mostly futurists that we back, in a sense, because they are able to think out of the ordinary. They're able to think what's going to happen most likely in a 1,000-day period or a 5-year period or a 20-year period. What status quo are they changing? And in that context, there's an intangible element that has to be valued, which we all take valuation for. There's an intangible understanding of the future, which is participating in the unknown, right? Now, that is really the valuation multiple that we are all worried about. Everybody wants a tangible valuation, you'll get it. You want book value, you'll get it, right? That's not a problem at all. But I think in an immature scenario, what we need to worry about is, are we overvaluing the intangible? That's the only issue. Now, when we talk about liquidation preferences and the like, there are two parts in this stage. In this stage, or the early stage, early to growth stage, let me put it, when things have not yet matured, you're making a combination of intellectual capital and financial capital come together. It's a very hard ask and a hard task. If they don't meet in the same time period that we seek it to happen, there is that risk which you did not sort of contemplate or you did not sort of evaluate. And therefore, at that point of time, the notion of overcapitalization of either party, right, whether it's the intellectual prowess or just the labor prowess versus the financial prowess required at that point in time of a journey. And I would suggest that there are horses for courses. So, it's unfair when there is intellectual property that's being backed, then what land and buildings you have is irrelevant. But if I'm backing something that requires a lot of land and buildings, then intellect, unfortunately, is less valued at that point in time. But it's this, toggle that I think we all suffer because we're all living in the future. And the future never pans out on a straight line. It is not linear. So I think in retrospect, all these clauses look inappropriate or extremely appropriate from the lens you wear. So it's not necessary that, either the founder or the so-called founding investor, I would say, in many ways, we are founding investors. We are also as invested as investors in the success of an enterprise or the success of the idea or the success that a customer might get benefits from. All of which are still in the future when we're making the investment. So I'd like to paraphrase that these are such relative conversations that do we then look for investors who appreciate and understand this? Do we look for founders who appreciate and understand this? If both parties are green, both parties are in a scenario of not being quote unquote sophisticated enough, then we're basically treading in the wrong area, right? And therefore, I think the notion of an accredited founder and an accredited investor seem to always create the so-called success and have lesser pitfalls. So a lot of education, a lot of heartburn, failure is relevant to both parties. It's not like either the investor or the founder is the only one failing. Both parties are failing in this universe.
So you actually brought in two very powerful ideas of physics, where you said three particles have to converge in a timeline that seemingly makes sense, which is basically the expectation about the future, the assumption on which the current investment was made, and all coming together at the same time with actual execution would actually make for happiness in physics. And in chemistry, you talked about how the founder and the investor chemistry, they are made for each other in the classical Wills cigarette ad, if that was a one, if I remember. So that is really, that's amazing. And I just think, Sudhir, in the context of the fact that as an industry, we have now come out of this whole problem with angel investors getting taxed, which is, I think, a great effort which the industry did. The CBDT guys would would really be completely perplexed with what you said. You want a system designed for certainty to deal with uncertainty on a lighter note. So, what are your thoughts, Sandeep, on this whole idea of physics and chemistry?
So, I think I was going to add to what Sudhir said. You know, entrepreneur, when they start building their business, particularly when they're bootstrapping, look at non-financial means of competition. So they are looking at a better product, they're looking at a better go-to-market, they're looking at some competitive advantage that comes outside of capital. The risk that you run as a overfunded company or as a funded company even is capital becomes part of your arsenal for competition. It's a positive. If taken the right way, it can be a huge positive. You are able to hire better talent, you are able to hire, you are able to work with, you're seen as a better company, more better partners work with you and so on. But the risk you run is capital becoming the primary modes of competition. So one of the challenges that we see is founders start looking at discounting as a means to compete, because it gives them, they have the capital. They can use the capital to effectively fund deployment, right? They can have consumers or businesses buying something cheaper than what it should be bought at, and that is a slippery slope. It works fine if you have consciously thought about it and said, okay, I need to get to this level of adoption before I can change my price or whatever else. So I'm going to go ahead and take a short-term view on increasing deployment, testing out my product, whatever is required to sort of get market leadership. And then subsequent to that, I will actually use the capital that I have to scale even faster. The challenge is that if you lose that edge from a product perspective or a go-to-market perspective, and capital becomes your primary driver for competition or for growth, it's very hard to recover. So I think to Sudhir's point, and the point he made, that there are a lot of things, there's the financial prowess, and then there is the IP prowess, the intellectual prowess. I think that the trade-off between the two and making sure that you are managing the trade-off between the two at the right time is very important.
So really, you're going back to the old tale and old adage all of us were told. Remember, money is the means to the end. Don't lose sight of the end in itself.
Absolutely.
And therefore, coming back to the end and to the use of money to get to that end, the backdrop that I think Sudhir has designed for today's session, I think you really like, which is basically we think hard work takes us directly to success, but actually to go from A, which is where we are today, to B, where we want to be, it's really a fuzzy B, and we have to go seesaw and zigzag to get there. So thank you, Sudhir, for that backdrop. And in that context of getting to B, Sandeep, what is your experience in terms of people using that money? How do they use it? We know they use it a lot for customer acquisition or tech development. Yeah. What is your view on talent? Is talent something people see as the most important thing to spend money on, or what has been your experience? Some anecdotes would be great.
So, so it's interesting. You see fundraising deck, and, there's this use of capital pie chart that a lot of them will have. And in that pie chart, there'll be 50% for product development and team development, and 20 to 30% for marketing and sales. And typically this is Series A. I'm not even Series B, that may flip. But the challenge we see is, once the money comes in, the entrepreneur needs to sort of stay true to the vision that they had set out. Mm-hmm. And the biggest challenge is the ability to delegate, right? So you've said, okay, once I have the money, I'll be able to hire the right people. It's not just about the money. It's money and the will to hire the right people. Because the best people, the best entrepreneurs are people that hire people that are better than them. And that awareness that, listen, I'm great at, say, product, but I suck at sales, or I'm terrible at running an engineering team, right? So I need to have a VP of engineering on board. Now, what happens is, before you've actually raised money, you've done you've played that role. You've played the role of VP engineering. You've been able to micromanage. You've been able to get things going. That's why you've raised money. Now that success that you had doing those roles comes as a sort of blocker when it comes to hiring people. Because there's always this fear, one of the challenges that we see with entrepreneurs is that a lot of their personal net worth is tied in that business, and they've seen the success.
Yes.
And so now all of a sudden they have to give up some parts of that role to others, and it becomes very hard, right? So you hire someone, you may even hire the right person, but you don't give them the ability to succeed in their role. You're constantly meddling or whatever else, right? So that ability to step back and say, okay, this is what I'm good at, and this is where my gaps are, and this is where I need to hire people, I think is a very critical aspect of post fundraising success, right? So after you have raised money, being able to find the right people to deploy that money alongside you, I think is a critical aspect of what you said, success, that hard work to success, and the zigzags that Sudhir has behind him. I think those are the difference is really, can you get people on board and thicken that line where the hard work is not just yours, but 10 other people who are working equally hard.
This is so basically you're bringing in a very Bhagavad Gita philosophy here, Sandeep. You're fundamentally saying, when Lord Krishna says Sangam Tyaktva Dhananjaya, he says don't get too attached to your role as the only force, but detach yourself, have the restraint to let people smarter than you succeed. And you're also trying to pointing out, which is fundamentally the point that as the IQ of the firm should go up each time a new person joins. And that is so critical. That's absolutely fabulous. But having a great team, having capital, having it at the right valuation is wonderful. But ultimately, as a growth investor, I always worry about the fact that somehow the unit economics, Sudhir, don't seem to get that kind of attention. So in addition to Sandeep's phenomenal points in terms of being restrained and hiring better talent and giving them the opportunity to perform, do people also get so obsessed with growth that they forget about unit economics, even though they put it in every PowerPoint slide?
Yeah. Again, horses for courses, Gopal. But the problem with, I'm an accountant, and I was taught in a certain manner about accounting standards and accounting reporting. And we tend to use this across every single kind of entity that we meet. We have a common standard for everybody. Now, that's not normal, right? Except in accounting. So when we discuss the language of unit economics, what is a unit? In what context are we defining those economics? And I think one of the big issues, we use the language of burn, spend, invest interchangeably almost. The language of burn is, you're saying that there's no concomitant revenue. Often we're running at that point in time where you have to go ahead and invest well before any chance of any revenue comes. This conversation is never brought up if I'm setting up a cement plant. It's very easy. What does the cost of a plant and equipment be? And you'll say, I need, $1 billion. And boom, comes cash and says, oh, by the way, it'll take time. Similarly, if I'm building a road, nobody questions how much will it cost to lay the road? And that is sent into a balance sheet. A lot of our businesses in startups are a lot of service infrastructure is getting built. For example, the fact is that we're a 60% services economy. So in some fashion, if we're doing, let's say, digital transformation as an area, then there is no hardware that we're really contemplating, right? We're not cement planting. We're having to lay a particular level of process infrastructure, which in accounting terms is a little skewed. We don't know whether to use the word invest, spend, or burn. And we don't contemplate capital for those zigzags. Every deviation in a service process build out, which can take 3 years, can take 7 years, for it to be accepted as a service, for it to be consumed as a service, when there will be concomitant revenue. And if it takes that much, then the unit of economics that for us, the notion of unit economics is not one transaction, but a body of transactions. Now that is, even if there is one revenue line. Often in services, there are adjacencies. There are areas that you will consume which are adjacent, and one might have a 90% margin, the other might have a minus 10% margin. But does the consumer then, does Amazon have to calculate the profit per product? Does it calculate per customer? Does it calculate per country? And so when they look at a 20-year investment, if a Procter & Gamble came into India and said, we'll invest for 20 years. When an ITC says we want to get into foods, let's put $1 billion out there. We'll suffer. We'll do product development. We'll do that. That startup phase can be all of 10 to 20 years for an ITC, for a Procter & Gamble, which are, tens of years old, decades old. Yet in the phase of startups, we have to contemplate this. And these are all unknown unknowns. So, but we want promises on known knowns, which is called unit economics. That disconnect, if we avoid, I think this language of unit economics itself, then we can, if you wear the right lens, then my unit of economics might be 3 years and somebody else's might be only 1 quarter at a time. And will be mismatched for sure. What we call
so basically, you want to equip everybody both with a telescope as well as a magnifying glass, so that everything in time should be profitable. The question of this definition of time, as Ashwath Damodaran always says, every company is profitable. The question is when, and therefore you need to figure out in today's certainty how that when translates into reality. But Sandeep, talking about just unit economics, the other aspect that you keep hearing about, including statements like, if you don't look back and see your first product was embarrassing, then you didn't try hard enough, and so forth. What's your view on companies? When we meet companies as growth capitalists, we often see that there are many imperfections in the companies, and yet some people seem to scale well with those imperfections, or some people get trapped into this model of complete perfection. Is there a happy medium? Is there one answer to this?
Yeah, I think Gopal, this goes back to, again, the founder having clarity on what is their sort of, means to compete. What is it that they have defined as their tip of the arrow to penetrate a market? A startup, or even say a growth company at an early stage, so we talked about PNGs and so on of the world, they have a lot more resources. But when you're working with limited resources, even a funded company, even overfunded companies have limitations in terms of the amount of initiatives they can take. So what you will find is a entrepreneur or an entrepreneurial team makes choices and says, my focus is, say, product. I may not have the best support team right now, but I have a phenomenal product, and I'm going to focus on making sure that the product doesn't need support. That's my, I will never build a phenomenal support team. I don't have that. But if you are coming in as an investor and you have a blueprint saying, I need to make sure that all of these functions are, working normally, you may find that, okay, there's a gap in support. And so it's a question of being able to say, okay, what is the founder's approach to market, and is that area well covered? Is that something which they have really understood and have built a sort of moat around, right? The point that unit economics that I think Sudhir brought up earlier, I think is very important in that context, because what we are seeing right now, and DoorDash just went public, and
correct,
Airbnb is going public tomorrow. But these are companies that have scaled over time. They are still unprofitable, but they are getting huge valuations, right? So what is working for them? The fact is that they are being seen as a fundamental shift in the way consumer is taking on a particular sort of task, right? So a DoorDash is changing the way that you are ordering meals. Airbnb is changing the way that you are going and staying in a leisure accommodation. Now, once they have defined that and they said that we're going to be the leader in this space, and this is how we're going to be the leader, people are not caring about profitability at this point. So unit economics, in my view, has a very interesting long-term perspective, which is what is the perceived value I'm creating for the consumer or the customer? And can I capture that value over a period of time? And if I capture that value, can I deliver that value at a cost lower than what I'm capturing? I think so. That is a exercise you can do outside of selling a product. So, Tesla is the largest, is seen as a very highly, overvalued company, but that's the argument that is being made. Is what they're changing, the value of what they are building in the long run is so high compared to, what they're selling right now. So I think that's the unit economics argument that you can look at it a different way.
This is brilliant. So basically, like in a very Apple-like fashion, what you're really saying is single-minded focus on that one thing that creates exceptional consumer value or customer value. That is the best way, rather than worry about, is this perfect, is that imperfect, maybe my customer support is working, maybe my this is not working, and that may be the real challenge. So I think all of you are using, I could see a lot of physics today in terms of time, certainty, uncertainty, convergence of issues, focus on laser like in a single object. Sudhir, your thoughts on basically perfect business models versus focus on value. How have you seen it play out? Could you give us an example from one of your portfolio company experiences?
I think focus on value to customer is probably my single most important factor that I would look at. And these things take time, as we've all built businesses ourselves. Like, fortunately, I've lived that life of an entrepreneur. And even if you take our fund business, it's also a business. It's an entrepreneurship that we are pursuing in our own model. I mean, he's been at it for 12 years with a company like Pubmatic, goes public today. What a feeling it must be to just reflect back what it was, 12 years ago. You would have met those brothers. The fact that they're worth $1 billion today, that's not the issue. I think building great businesses is really what we are all about. I mean, I've been fortunate to have been an entrepreneur, lived that life, and today I live the same life, right? To me, frankly, just do the right thing for your customer. Rest should follow. Rest should follow if you have a customer. If you're at the product phase, you're not yet at the customer phase, as is about $1 trillion of R&D spent in the world today annually. They have a 20-year budget. They have a cycle of do something. Don't worry about customers. They'll come 20 years later. Make the right product. If clarity, if you're an inventor, right, and not necessarily the innovator. Now, if you're an inventor, I should allow you the space to be the inventor. And I have found fantastic stuff coming out because they work with their materials, they work with their intellect, and that's the joy, right? It's a work of art. So to me, depending on which spectrum you are associated with, either you're just obsessed about the product first, and which is fine. You can build milestones and they can be 3 to 5 years if I'm invested in that area. And if I'm looking at customer-centric entities, more close to customer, yet you have to build that entire model. I would say there are plenty of examples within our portfolio where we've found that clarity of thought has allowed the founder to go through the zigzags, frankly, go through the deviations in life, go through what you went out to do in the unknown sphere. You have chosen that risk model. Where if you just rightly pointed out, the leadership of our country says that the new freedom from our own economic state is going to be risk-taking rather than not taking risk because you love the status quo. You can see smack in your face that is not what we want to do. If I look at a company that we backed called Stellabs, which is in the dairy technology business, and you go to these farms or you go to these villages which have less than 200 people, you realize that we are in a bubble, or they are themselves in a bubble as well, because either they do not have access or I don't have access to the thought. But when these companies say we want to do something for that set of individual that's there as part of our society, we want to look at it inclusively. And I want to take frontline technologies from prevalence in, whether it's in the valley or anywhere else, but take it all the way down. And then within a short span, you actually see them touching the lives of 3, 4, 5 million families. It is incredibly powerful.
Absolutely.
But
Inclusion is the thing.
but come back to unit economics. What was the unit economics for this? Are you going to draw up quarterlies and say we're in bad shape and therefore I can't put capital on it? Or should I put capital on it because we're going to move like a tsunami 1 millimeter above, right? We don't need more than 1 centimeter. But if we're able to shift, a behavioral shift in protocol, in self-serving systems where the technology is going to assist somebody to
Understood.
improve their quality, improve what they produce, get more margin. If that happens and that's going to take 3 years, we should have the wait time for 3 years. And my unit economics would be a 3-year time frame, not a quarterly time frame, not a
Understood.
month time frame.
I think we're coming to the end of the session. Before I wrap up, I think one very quick question to each of you. Sandeep, what is, in one line or few words, what is the single biggest failure or pitfall in your mind? If you had to choose one pitfall and say this one you avoid, what would that be?
I would say the most important thing for any person raising capital is expectation management. It's expectation management with your investors. It's expectation management with your team. It's expectation management with your customer. And I would sort of say customer, team, and investor in that order is probably the best way.
That captures it all. And Sudhir, one thing would you put in the absolute must-do list to power oneself from this A to fuzzy B? What would that one thing, if you had to choose among the list of 10 things that one has to do?
I'd say clarity and constancy of purpose.
So clarity and constancy of purpose. And I think Sandeep has clearly picked his point also equally well in terms of the biggest pitfall. So therefore, thank you very much. I think that exactly on time, Lokesh. I think we heard 5 things today very, very clearly. Money is a means to an end. Understand what you want to get to, not the means. Don't get obsessed with the means. Number 2, customer value is everything. Don't worry about perfection and imperfection. Just focus on customer value. Number 3, when in your organization, take one super strong area and make that your only goal. Like Arjuna, don't see the forest, don't see the tree, the branch, the leaf, just see the eye of the bird. Whatever you define that eye of the bird. Lastly, we are basically looking at definitions of time and expectation management. So everything may be fine in 5 years. You should not be using a quarter. And as I think Sudhir put it very well, we are trying to navigate from known uncertainties, because there are known unknowns, to actually try to crystallize them into what appears to be certainties today. And in that journey, of course, one has to be very, very circumspect. And I think as Sandeep put it, therefore manage that expectation very, very well. I want to thank Sandeep and I want to thank Sudhir for their very complimentary comments in the pitfalls, or rather the things that one should do to avoid the pitfalls to get from fuzzy A to fuzzy B. The government says that the digital economy in 2025 is going to be $1 trillion in India. And I think all of the people today in the conference are contributing to this huge Ganga that is flowing, or called the digital economy. And I wish everybody all success. And thank you again to TiE Global and TiE Hyderabad for putting this amazing session together. Thank you.
Thank you so much for organizing everything.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sandeep Singhal, Mr. Sudhir Rao, and Mr. Gopal Srinivasan. This was a very, very insightful session for everybody. Thank you all the attendees. Thank you, TiE Global Summit 2020 team. Stay safe. Have a great day. Thank you so much once again, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks.